my answer to your question, Jason, is that one thing, if we accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years, has a chance to really change the course of the United States. I believe in nat gas. I believe in coal, actually, as a bridge fuel. I believe in all of these things. I believe that these are all more important than going off to all of these foreign lands and trying to justify spending trillions of dollars and putting tens of thousands of American lives at risk, essentially for resources that we can actually create for ourselves at home. The United States could have had a much more aggressive and thoughtful strategy of refining by pushing out these maturities way into the future. And again, Trump actually suggested that, but because he sounded like a goofball, everybody said absolutely no way. But in hindsight, that one move would have saved us trillions of dollars over the next decade if we had done it. And this time around, we have to have politicians who are smart enough and have the wherewithal to say, it doesn't matter where this idea came from. It's really smart. Rates are now back to 2% or 1.5%. Let's now issue 50 and 100-year bonds and let's refi this problem out into the future. That makes a ton of sense and we have to do it.
Chamath Palihapitiya is a Sri Lankan-born venture capitalist and billionaire that has made waves in the investment world. Palihapitiya was an early senior executive at Facebook from 2007 to 2011. Chamath thinks that the government needs to get one major thing right to secure the future of the US for the next 20 years. What could that be? Watch till the end to find out.
The single biggest issue that we have is that we have made a huge decision to deglobalize, and that deglobalization has the risk of introducing a hyperinflation loop. And we won't know how bad that is for another year or two. Today, let's just say you buy a chip to make the iPhone. You buy that chip from, TSMC that makes it in Taiwan, ships it to China, and the entire world is serviced with that supply chain that keeps that chip as cheap as possible. Now, with the CHIPS Act as an example, we will build resilient supply chains where now instead of one place, it'll come from 6 places. 5 of those 6 will be in allied territories. The United States, Western Europe, potentially Mexico. The thing with that is that now is 6x more equipment that you're buying, right? Instead of one machine, you now have 6 machines. Instead of one person operating the machine in one country, you have 6 people in 6 countries. As you can imagine, when you layer up all these costs, there is no world in which that chip is as cheap as it was before. And so the cost of that has to be borne either by the consumer who pays a higher price, that's measured as inflation, or by the government who subsidizes it at the point of import, that'll be measured by debt. And so one way or the other in our path now towards more resiliency and national security, which by the way, I think is the absolute right decision, okay? Energy independence, all of this stuff we have to do today. We are at risk of a hyperinflationary loop if not managed well. And so you have to be really on the levers of the economy and you have to understand it deeply.
If you get value out of our videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our Growth Mindset channel.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and my formation is that there's one thing that allows us to solve all 3, if you bear with me for a second, and I think that is the energy independence of the United States. If you look inside of what's happening in the US today, the cost of generating energy is effectively as cheap as it's ever been and as close to zero as it ever has been, and it's only going to get cheaper. The problem that we have is that we have all of these decrepit laws and infrastructure and regulatory capture that causes us to always be in an imbalance. And as a result, we do all kinds of crazy things. We borrow enormous amounts of money to create subsidies. We go and we fight all of these, foreign wars that don't make any sense. We wrap the energy problem instead in climate change language, which causes this cultural division. But my belief, quite honestly, is that the reason the IRA was so important is it is the most clarified piece of legislation we've seen that essentially puts all forms of energy on a level playing field and has the chance to get America to permanent energy independence. And if the cost of energy is zero and we can abundantly create it in the United States, what I think happens, David, is we have energy to rebuild our supply chain much cheaper, so inflation gets under control, we don't borrow as much. We have a completely different lens on foreign policy so that this interventionism and fighting over resources is much harder to justify. And we put the climate change language aside and we use energy independence as a form of national security, which gives us the courage to battle all these other cultural taboos that we otherwise have to say we agree with, even if they don't necessarily make any sense. And there's a bunch of them. My answer to your question, Jason, is that one thing, if we accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years, has a chance to really change the course of the United States. oh my God, we've exceeded 100%. The empire is going to go to ruin. That's not why the empire goes to ruin. We have the reserve currency of the world, and there's an enormous amount of power that comes from that position. So what the right number is TBD. That's the most honest way to think about it. It was 100. It's at 150. It could go to 200. Many countries operate at levels above us and still haven't imploded per se. The real thing is what part of what Friedberg said is, look, if you really want to look at what we pay, today we pay $400 billion this year. That's the interest payments, okay? That's when you calculate all of the different maturities we have with all of the different coupons we have. That's what we owe today. And David is right mathematically that if interest rates go to 5% and stay there forever, but we know that that's not how economies work. They ebb and flow, okay? So the real problem that we have to understand is how do you actually create enough growth? And then the next time that we have a meaningful fall in interest rates, like every other person does, look, a lot of people in America know how to refi their credit cards, refi their home loans, refi their mortgages. The United States could have had a much more aggressive and thoughtful strategy of refining by pushing out these maturities way into the future. And again, Trump actually suggested that, but because he sounded like a goofball, everybody said absolutely no way. But in hindsight, that one move would have saved us trillions of dollars over the next decade if we had done it. And this time around, we have to have politicians who are smart enough and have the wherewithal to say, it doesn't matter where this idea came from. It's really smart. Rates are now back to 2% or 1.5%. Let's now issue 50 and 100-year bonds, and let's refi this problem out into the future. That makes a ton of sense, and we have to do it. This entire world runs on the US dollar complex. Okay. Whenever we raise rates, yes, it is true that on the one hand, our interest payments go up, but proportionately and on a relative basis, I think maybe let me take a step back. Look, one of the most important things in investing, which is appropriate here, is that people ask, what is the price of a stock? Well, before you go public, you're calculating what the intrinsic value of a company is. Okay, all the things that they do, all the money that they make, here's what we think it's theoretically worth. But the minute it goes public, the intrinsic value no longer matters. It's what is it valued relative to everything else. Okay? The United States is a relative, if it's a stock, if all these countries are stocks, we are valued relatively to others, not intrinsically. And the reason why we have so much power is because everybody else is actually valued relative to us. So this is why I think the right thing to look at, Jason, is the rate of change of debt to GDP for the entire G8 or G20 or the rest of the world. And what you'll see is something that goes up and to the right. Nobody in the world has been rewarded for not investing in their populations and basically borrowing from tomorrow to invest in today's human capital.
Leave a comment below if you think Chamath Palihapitiya is correct with his one big thing of energy independence for America.